the results and the conclusions that we will be providing in our research paper is highly dependent with the research questionnaire, the design of our research questionnaire or our research instrument. Okay, so this afternoon I will be sharing with you the different topics that I will be including in this presentation. Particularly, I will be dealing with the two basic types of variables, observed and unobserved variables. I will also be discussing the two basic types also of variable or constructs, which we call them the types of constructs. Then I will be giving you the idea of validity and reliability tests every time we come up or we design our research instruments. Then I will be giving you an idea of what factor analysis is all about. Then a little bit of back translation, reverse coding, and the difference between pre-testing and pilot testing. Okay, so I think these are the things that we need to remember or to be guided every time we design our research instruments. Okay, so let's start. So let's start with the difference between an observed and unobserved variable. Remember, every time we craft our research instruments, we need to classify our variables, whether our variables that we will be using is an observed variable or it is an unobserved variable. Okay, so what's the difference between the two? So when we talk about observed variable, or it is also called as manifest variable. So these are the this is a type of variable that is directly observed, okay, or directly measured. Okay, so for example, let's say I want to know, for example, the gender or maybe the sex of my respondents, or maybe the marital status of my respondents, or maybe the age of my respondents. Those types of variables are what we call observed variable. Okay, or we call them also as manifest variable because we can directly measure them. On the other hand, when we talk about unobserved variable, or it is also called latent variable, okay, these are the type of variables that cannot be measured directly. So for example, let's say you want to measure the level of job satisfaction. So how do we measure the level of job satisfaction? Because if you're going to look at it, job satisfaction cannot be measured directly. But there are different ways on how we can directly measure it. For example, let's see if we will be using, let's see, a Likert scale on how to measure job satisfaction. Or maybe, for example, we want to measure the level of organizational commitment. Or maybe the propensity to quit the organization or intention to quit. Or maybe the level of grit of employees. Okay, so these types of variables are called what we call unobserved variables, or what we call also as latent variables. Why? Because we cannot directly measure them. So typically, in order for us to measure job satisfaction, organizational commitment, intention to quit, or grit, for example, we use what we call, for example, a scale. The most, I think the most commonly used is, for example, the Likert scale. Okay, so those are what we call unobserved variables. Okay, so when we talk about observed variables or manifest variables, these are variables that are directly measured. On the other hand, when we talk about unobserved variables, these are variables that cannot be measured directly. Okay, so that's the two basic difference between observed and unobserved variables. Okay, so for example, let's say example of observed variable, let's say you want to know whether you are your respondent is a student or an employee. So this is an example of what we call observed variable. Or for example, you want to know the year level, assuming, let's say, you are your respondents include, for example, students, college. Let's say you want to ask whether they are first-year students, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, and so on and so forth. These are what we call observed variables. Okay, or for example, you want to know how many years, okay, your respondent have been employed in the organization. Okay, so that is an example of an observed variable. Okay, or kaya naman, we want to know, let's say, the sex of our respondent, whether he is a male or she is a female. Or for example, age. Okay, we want to know the age of our respondents. So these are examples of what we call observed variables. Okay? On the other hand, for example, we want to measure, let's say, the level of customer satisfaction. Okay? We want to measure, for example, consumer return on investment. Or for example, we want to measure behavioral intentions. Okay, so typically, in order for us to measure, let's say, customer satisfaction, we try to include what we call items or indicators, okay, in order for us to measure satisfaction. Then these indicators or items are measured usually using a scale. For example, a five-point Likert scale, where 5 means, let's say, strongly agree, 1 means strongly disagree. Okay, so these are examples of what we call unobserved variables. Okay, so as I mentioned a while ago, when we talk about unobserved variables, these are variables that we cannot directly measure. And usually, if we want to measure them, we use what we call a scale. So typical example, a Likert scale. Okay, so these are examples of what we call unobserved variables. Next, another important thing that you need to remember every time we develop, okay, or we design our research instrument or our questionnaire is to identify what kind of constructs are we measuring, okay? I think one of the things that we tend to forget nowadays, every time we establish or we craft our research instrument, is sometimes we forget, okay, to identify what type of construct are we using, okay? So if you're going to classify the types of construct, basically we try to classify them in two extremes or two classifications. We call them as a reflective construct, and we call them, the other one is what we call formative construct, okay? So what's the difference between a reflective and a formative construct? Okay, in a reflective construct, okay, these are items, or a reflective construct is composed of items or indicators that represent the latent variable. It means, for example, we want to measure, for example, customer satisfaction. So we have items. So these items represent, okay, latent variable, which is customer satisfaction. Okay. Number two, in a reflective construct, all our items or our indicators are highly correlated. Okay. When we say highly correlated, it means they move in the same direction. Okay. So all the indicators, let's say we have 5 items for our measure we have 5 items or 5 indicators in measuring customer satisfaction. All those 5 items, if it is a reflective construct, all those items are what we call highly correlated. It means they move in the same direction. Number 3, in a reflective construct, deletion of an item or an indicator will not affect the meaning of the latent construct. What do I mean? So for example, let's say, again, if we are going to measure, let's say, customer satisfaction, and we have 5 items, and let's assume we will be deleting 1, so there are still remaining 4 items. Those 4 indicators or 4 items can still measure, okay, our reflective construct, which is customer satisfaction. Okay, so that is the characteristics of a reflective construct. Number 2, when we talk about formative construct, of course, this is formative construct is the exact opposite of the reflective construct. Okay, so in formative construct, your items or your indicators causes the latent variable. Okay, so what do I mean? For example, let's say, in a formative construct, let's say you have 5 items again, and let's assume we have the same construct, let's say customer satisfaction, but this time we will be measuring it formatively. Okay, so it means those indicators or items that measure customer satisfaction forms the latent variable. Okay. Number 2, in a formative construct, all the items or indicators are not highly correlated. It means they do not move in the same direction. Okay, so if we have 5 items or 5 indicators in a formative constructs, those items or indicators do not move in the same direction. And number 3, deletion of an item or an indicator may affect the meaning of the latent construct. What do I mean? In a formative construct, if you will be omitting, so for example, we have 5 items, we will be omitting 1, there is a high probability that these 4 items will not be able to measure the formative construct. Unlike with reflective construct, in a reflective construct, if we will be deleting, for example, 1 item, okay, still the 4 items can still measure. Okay, so that's the difference between a reflective and a formative construct. Okay, now before I will be giving you an exact example of what a reflective construct is and what a formative construct is, let's have first the representation through diagram of the two types of constructs. So if we will be representing reflective and formative construct, this is how we represent them using diagram. Okay, so in a reflective construct, you will see if this is your construct, let's say this is satisfaction. And let's say this x1, x2, x3 are your items or your indicators. Okay, you will see the arrow is moving towards your items or indicators. Okay, so if you're going to look at it, the arrow goes or moves towards your indicators. Okay, on the in a formative construct, your items, okay, so let's say again, our construct here, let's say it is satisfaction, then we have 3 items measuring satisfaction, but this time formatively. Okay, you will see the arrow is from indicator going to, okay, the construct. Okay, so you will see the arrow from indicator going to, okay, going to the construct. So that's how we represent the two. Okay, so this one is an example of a reflective construct, and this one is an example of a formative construct. Okay, now let's try to have an example. Okay, so this example came from the paper of Albers in 2010. Okay, here the author measured the construct satisfaction. Okay, so let's assume we want to measure satisfaction, but we will be measuring satisfaction reflectively. So we will treat satisfaction as a reflective construct. Okay, so if we will be treating, for example, satisfaction as a reflective construct, and let's assume these are the items or indicators. Okay, so for example, our first indicator tells us, I feel well in this hotel. Number 2, I'm always happy to stay in this hotel. Number 3, I recommend this hotel to others. Okay, so you will notice here, the items or indicators measuring satisfaction reflectively, all these 3 items are what we call highly correlated. It means, for example, if the respondent, let's assume we will be using these items as a measure of satisfaction, okay, and we will let our respondents answer satisfaction in a reflective manner. Let's assume we will be measuring this one in a 5-point Likert scale. Let's assume 5 means strongly agree, then 1 means strongly disagree. Okay, so let's assume we will be using a 5-point Likert scale. Okay, so let's assume your respondent 1 answered here. Let's say he answered, I feel well in this hotel, and he answered strongly agree. Okay, so our his answer is 5, strongly agree. What do you think will be the answer of respondent 1 in item 2? I am always happy to stay in this hotel. Most probably the answer is also 5. Why? Because 1 and 2 are highly correlated. It means they are almost the same. Okay, so if you feel well in the hotel, most probably you will be happy staying in that hotel. So it means these 2 items are highly correlated. Okay, another thing, the third one, I recommend this hotel to others. So let's what would be the possible answer of respondent 1 for item 3? Most probably his answer also. Why? Because if he feels well in the hotel and he's always happy staying in the hotel, there's so you will see these items are highly correlated. So satisfaction here was measured reflectively. So that is a reflective construct. Okay. Second one, we have formative construct. So what's the difference? So let's assume we will be using again the same construct, which is satisfaction, but this time we will be measuring it formatively instead of reflectively. So we will treat satisfaction now using as a formative construct. Okay, and let's assume these are the items to measure satisfaction formatively. So for example, the first item is the service is good. Okay? So let's assume again we will be using 5-point Likert scale where 5 means strongly agree, 1 means strongly disagree. Okay? So you will notice in our item 1 or indicator 1, what is the item all about? The item is all about service. Okay? So we want to measure in item 1 the level of service in the hotel. Okay? How about number 2? Number 2 is the personnel are friendly. Okay, what do we measure here? We are measuring the level of satisfaction in terms of personnel. The question, if for example, the respondent answered in indicator 1 or item 1, let's say 5, strongly agree. Okay, it means he strongly agreed that the service is good in the hotel. What do you think would be the answer for number 2? The personnel are friendly. Does it mean if the service is good, automatically the personnel are friendly? Most probably not. So there's a high possibility that the answer in item 1 is strongly agree, but here it is, let's say, disagree. Okay? And number 3, look at this one. The third one, the room is well equipped. So what does it measure in terms of satisfaction? It is all about the room. Okay? So does it guarantee if the room is well equipped, then personnel are friendly? Basically, no. So what does it mean? The items used in this are not highly correlated. So satisfaction here means it was measured formatively. Okay, why do I emphasize here this one, the difference between a reflective construct and a formative construct? Because if we will be utilizing reflective construct and a formative construct, there are also different ways on how to measure their level of reliability and level of validity. Okay, the way we measure the level of validity in reflective construct, okay, is different on the way we measure formative construct in terms of validity. Okay, that's the reason from the onset, if you will be designing your research instrument, you need to think, okay, and you need to analyze whether your items are, or your construct rather, are measured reflectively or they are measured formatively. Okay, so that's the difference between reflective and formative construct. Okay, so just to give you other, some additional definition, when we talk about reflective indicators, okay, so these are from reflective construct. Reflective indicators are essentially interchangeable, okay? And therefore, removal of an item does not change the essential nature of the underlying construct. What do we mean with this one? Let's go back with our previous example. Okay, look at this one. Okay, so these are the items for satisfaction wherein we treated satisfaction reflectively. Okay, if I will be omitting, for example, one of these items, one from these 3 items, let's say I will remove this one, I feel well in the hotel. Instead, I will be measuring satisfaction only by these 2 items. It means if it is a reflective construct, these reflective indicators can still measure satisfaction. Okay? It means you can still measure the level of satisfaction even though you will be deleting, okay, one of the items here. On the other hand, if it is formative, if you will be deleting one, okay, you cannot guarantee that you will be able to still measure satisfaction. For example, you will be removing the first item. It is all about service. Okay, if you will be removing this one, then you are only measuring satisfaction in terms of personnel and satisfaction in terms of room, but not about service. Okay, so that's the difference between a reflective and a formative construct. So you will see here, with formative indicators, omitting an indicator is omitting a part of the construct. Okay, so in a formative indicator, if you will be removing one of the items, it means you are removing one part of the construct. Okay, unlike with reflective indicators, if you will be remove one, let's say you have 3 items, you will be removing one, okay, still those 2 items can still measure the construct. It can still represent the latent variable. Okay, so that's the difference between reflective and formative. Okay, next, let's try to differentiate now, or let's try to evaluate or assess the importance of reliability and validity. Okay, now, if, for example, you will be establishing or crafting your research instrument, okay, there are always two things that are important here. One is measuring the level of reliability, and number two, measuring the level of validity. Okay? And when we talk about reliability, the most common statistical tool or the statistical techniques that we use in measuring reliability is Cronbach's and composite reliability. On the other hand, in terms of validity, the most appropriate and the most common are discriminant validity tests and convergent validity tests. Okay, so these are the usual requirement if we want to prove that the construct that we used in our instrument are reliable and at the same time valid. Because remember, if you want to have a sound instrument, you need to prove that the constructs are reliable and valid. But again, let's go back with our definition a while ago, or our presentation a while ago. The first thing that you need to do first before measuring the reliability and validity is to identify whether your construct is a reflective construct or a formative construct. Because the way we measure, for example, the validity of a formative construct is different from a reflective construct. Okay? So dalawa, magkaiba ang proseso nila. Okay? So we need to understand that. Okay? Now, what is reliability? Why do we always identify, or we always measure reliability? Okay? Of course, these are definitions. When we talk about reliability, it's simply measure internal consistency of items. Okay? When we talk about internal consistency, it means your item should be consistent. Okay? Or the indicators that you used, okay, in measuring a construct or a variable, okay, are consistent. Okay? And they represent the variable or the construct. That is basically reliability. It is a measure of consistency. Again, there are two ways on how to measure reliability. It is through composite reliability. Composite reliability is more acceptable now because if you will be reading literature, it is more acceptable than Cronbach's alpha. Okay, composite reliability is also called the Dillon-Goldstein raw coefficient. Okay, so that's the other name of composite reliability. Okay, on the other hand, okay, this one, as I mentioned, if you will be doing your instrument, okay, or you're going to develop your research instrument, you need to identify whether the construct that you will be using is a reflective construct or a formative construct. Okay, why do you need to identify that? Because if we will be testing the validity and reliability, there are two ways on how to measure them. For reflective construct, which is the most commonly used in most journals or journal publications or most research studies that I have seen, most of the constructs that are available or that are commonly used, okay, in most research studies, their constructs reflectively. Okay, now if your construct is a reflective construct, then there are three things that you need to remember. One, in a reflective construct, you need to measure internal consistency or the reliability. Through what? You can measure it through Cronbach's alpha and composite reliability. Number two, you need to measure the validity. Through what? Through convergent validity. Okay, so how do you measure convergent validity? Of course, this is a statistical technique in measuring validity test, wherein you will be assessing the factor loading or the item loading or the indicator loading and average variance extracted. Okay, these are just jargons. And of course, number three, in a reflective construct, you need to measure discriminant validity. Okay, in discriminant validity, you can use Forner-Larker criterion, okay, one of the, I think, oldest statistical tests or techniques in measuring discriminant validity, and also you can use heterotrait-monotrate ratio of correlation or the HTMT. Okay, which is in some journals or some research studies that I have read, they mention HTMT is more powerful in measuring discriminant validity compared with Forner-Larker. But there are some also articles that says that Forner-Larker criterion is better than HTMT. But of course, they are both techniques, okay, to measure discriminant validity. So it means if your construct is a reflective construct, you need to measure the reliability or the internal consistency using Cronbach's alpha and composite reliability. In terms of validity, you need to measure convergent validity, okay, by examining the factor loading and the average variance extracted, and discriminant validity using Forner-Larker criterion and heterotrait monotrait ratio of correlation, or the HTMT. Okay, so those are the requirements, okay, in order for us to prove that our constructs used in the study are valid and reliable. Okay, remember, we use this one if our construct is a reflective construct. On the other hand, if you are using, or if you will be using formative construct, okay, what are the requirements? One, you do not measure reliability anymore. Why? Because in a formative construct, you will not expect internal consistency. Why you will not be able to expect internal consistency? Because items in a formative construct, okay, items in a formative construct are not highly correlated. So you do not expect internal consistency. Okay, so what are you going to measure? One, measure the level of validity again, convergent validity. Number two, you need to measure what we call collinearity. Okay, what is collinearity? Of course, if you have taken your statistics 101, okay, collinearity is basically, we measure collinearity so that we will not be encountering some error, okay, in measuring our construct. Type 1, type 2 errors, still remember? Okay, so if we want to avoid achieving form of error, then we need to measure the level of collinearity. Okay, so remember, collinearity is usually evident, or collinearity measurement is very important every time we measure or we have a formative construct. And number three, you need to measure or identify the outer weight and the level of significance. Okay, so in a formative construct, the requirements are also three, but this time, okay, we do not measure reliability anymore. Instead, we will be measuring convergent validity, collinearity, and outer weight significance. Okay, so this is very important. Okay, whether you are a graduate school student, or you are a graduate school researcher, a faculty researcher, or if you are teaching, for example, in the graduate school and you are sitting as panel or advisor, okay, during, for example, defense, oral defense of your PhD students, or let's say your MBA students, okay, because in most, if you are not familiar with this one, then the probability of having poor results and wrong is high. That's the reason from the onset, we need to properly identify whether our constructs are reflective constructs or they are formative constructs. Okay, why? Because we measure them differently. Okay, so that's the difference between reflective and formative. Okay, so some definition. Okay, so we have convergent validity and of course discriminant validity. Okay, so basically, what's the meaning or the definition of validity? In layman's term, I want to define it as if you are the designer of the questionnaire, your understanding of the items should be the same as the understanding of your respondents. It means if you have, let's say, 5 items to measure satisfaction, okay, those 5 items should have the same understanding as the designer of the questionnaire, and the respondents also understand those items in the same manner as the designer of the instrument. Okay, that is basically validity. Okay, validity is not all about grammar checking, because I think some of us think that if we want to validate our instrument, okay, we always ask for expert advice, or maybe your advisor will tell you, okay, go to an expert, make it, let him validate the instrument. Okay, remember validity, if you will be using statistics, is all about convergent and discriminant validity. Okay, you do not say that your instrument is valid by simply letting somebody. Grammar checking is not all about validity. Grammar checking is only all about identifying whether there are grammar problems or there are syntax problems with your items, but that is not validity test. Okay, so if you will be measuring validity, we have convergent and discriminant validity. Okay, this will guarantee us that the construct that we used in the study is a valid construct. Okay, these are some definition. So what are the thresholds, or what are the requirements if we will be measuring Cronbach's alpha and composite reliability? These are some of the that I got. So for Cronbach's alpha and composite reliability, the requirement is usually 0.7 or 70% above. So in order for us that the construct is reliable, the value or the threshold for Cronbach's alpha and composite reliability, 0.7, at least 0.7. Okay, for convergent validity, okay, so these are the requirements for convergent validity. Let's say you will be measuring convergent validity. One, the loading or the factor loading should be 0.5. The average variance extracted is also 0.5. Okay, according to Forner-Larker, here at 2017, 2009 rather, and COP 2017. Okay, so in order for you to say that there is convergent validity, factor loading should be equal to 0.5. Your average variance extracted should also be equal to 0.5. And of course, each of your items should be significant. It means the p-value should be equal to or lower than 0.05. Okay, so that's the requirement for convergent validity. On the other hand, if we want to measure discriminant validity, we need to measure what we call the square root of AVEs. Okay, so what's the requirement for discriminant validity, particularly if you are going to make use of the Forner-Larker criterion? The requirement is the AVE should be greater than any of the correlations variable. It means those square root of the AVEs, okay, should be the greater than the values of the off-diagonal. Later, I will be showing you an actual results so that you will be able to appreciate them. Okay. Of course, most probably some of you may think, oh my God, this is very hard. How can I identify factor loading, AVE? What is those square root of AVEs? Okay. Remember, in measuring reliability and validity, we use, okay, statistical softwares now. And what is good with statistical softwares now, you're going to simply, okay, input your raw data or your data set, then the software will calculate everything for you. Okay, so you don't need to worry. All you need to do is basically understand the software. Okay, so that's the beauty of technology now. You can measure them using statistical software in one sitting. Okay. And of course, and outer weights. So how do we measure them? For collinearity and outer weight, we simply identify what's the value. For outer weight, we simply identify the value of the outer weight. Then those outer weights should be significant. For collinearity, of course, there's also a threshold. We can use a cutoff of 3.3. We can also use a cutoff of 5, depending on your sources. Okay, so just to summarize, okay, so if you will be measuring, for example, okay, you will be measuring a reflective construct. These are the requirements. Internal consistency, that is Cronbach's alpha and composite reliability, the threshold or the requirement equal to or higher than 0.7. For convergent validity, item or factor loading equal to or greater than 0.5. p-value should be at, equal to 0.05 or lower. And for average variance extracted, okay, equal to 0.5 or higher. Okay? Then for discriminant validity, okay, so for discriminant validity, as I mentioned, you can use Forner-Larker or the Htmp. So for discriminant validity, if you will be following Forner-Larker, so for each variable, the square root of AVEs should be greater than any of the correlations involving the said variable. Okay, so that's the requirement for Forner-Larker. Then for Htmp, the proposed value according to Gold et al. Is 0.9 as a threshold. Okay, so all you need to do is basically to remember this threshold. Okay, so once you already know your type of construct, then you already also know what are the ways on how to measure them. Okay, and at the same time, of course, you need to remember the threshold. Okay, so that's how you measure reflective construct. So for formative, in terms of convergent validity, the same. So item factor greater equal to 0.5, p-value equal or lower than 0.05, EVE equal or greater than 0.5. So for collinearity, you can use this one, threshold, which is commonly used now, 3.3 or lower, okay, for your variance factor. If you will be using the threshold by Hare et al. In 2011, 5 or lower. That's the requirement for collinearity. So for outer weight and significance, your outer weight should always be significant. It means the p-value of each weight should be equal to or lower than 0.05. So these are the requirements or the thresholds if you will be measuring a construct formatively. Okay, again, as I mentioned, these are basically thresholds that we need to follow. And again, what is good about technology today, softwares now can measure all these things in one sitting. Okay, all you need to do is to equip ourselves of the difference between a reflective and formative and know what are the requirements in measuring a reflective and formative construct. Okay? Now, let's have an example. This is one of the studies that I am currently conducting together with my co-author in the Graduate School of the University of the Assumption. So Dr. Arnold Sikat is one of the professors at the University of the Assumption. We are currently doing a research study. We are already on the terminal stage. We are just simply polishing the paper and we will be submitting this one in a Scopus Index journal. Okay, so this research paper is all about experiential quality, experiential satisfaction, perceived value, experiential trust, and of course, experiential loyalty. Okay, of course, all of you are familiar with Starbucks. Okay, of course, Starbucks is so common among Filipinos. Okay, so we tried to come up with a research study to measure experiential quality and its effect or influence on experiential loyalty. Okay, so this time we use several constructs. One, we use experiential quality. Okay, experiential quality has 4 dimensions: interaction quality, physical environment, outcome, and affective quality. Then we have other constructs: experiential satisfaction, perceived value, and experiential trust. And our outcome variable is experiential loyalty. Okay? So this is our research framework or our conceptual framework. Okay? So if you're going to look at it, we have numerous constructs here. But again, we need to identify now, okay, what type of constructs are they? Okay, so going back in this diagram or this figure, as I mentioned, experiential quality was measured in terms of 4 dimensions. Okay, so we measured the quality of interaction, the physical environment, outcome quality, affective quality. Okay, so these are the 4 dimensions of experiential quality. Okay, and experiential quality in our paper was measured formatively. Okay, why? Because it has 4 dimensions, and these 4 dimensions okay, 4 dimensions form experiential quality. That's why we measure experiential quality as a second order construct, but this time it is a formative construct. Okay, if we will be treating each of this, experiential satisfaction, on the other hand, experiential satisfaction, perceived value, and experiential quality and experiential loyalty on the other hand were measured reflectively. Okay, so you will notice in this paper construct, and we have 4. Okay, we have 4 reflective constructs. Okay, so that's how we treated our constructs. Okay, why it is important for us to know? Because as I mentioned a while ago, the way we measure formative is different from the way we measure reflective. Okay, so that's how we treated our constructs. Okay, so from the onset, we need to properly identify our constructs. Okay, now, for example, this is our measure of internal consistency and convergent validity for reflective construct. Okay, so we have experiential satisfaction, perceived value, experiential trust, experiential loyalty. So these are the factor loading, average variance extracted, composite reliability, and Cronbach's alpha. Okay, so where did we get all these numbers? Of course, software. We use a software. Okay, so as I mentioned, in one sitting you can compute all these things. Okay, so here we have good factor loading, average variance extracted, and also CR and CA, composite reliability, and Cronbach's alpha. So it means we have internal consistency for our reflective constructs and convergent validity also. Okay, but for our formative, okay, for our formative construct, so the first one, as I mentioned, is these are reflective constructs. Okay, but this one is a formative construct. Okay, so for this formative construct, these are the ways on how we measure them. Factor loading, AVE, this is for collinearity. VIF, variance inflation factor. Then we have outer weight and their corresponding p-value or their level of significance. So if you're going to look at these numbers or these coefficients, they are within the acceptable thresholds or values. Okay, so you will notice here we measure convergent validity and collinearity of formative construct. Okay, so the way we measure formative and reflective, different. So you need to understand that, okay? For discriminant validity, we use Forner-Larker. Okay, actually we use both Forner-Larker, and at the same time we also use Htmp. So just to give you an idea, how do we interpret Forner-Larker criterion? You simply look the value of the diagonal values. The diagonal value should be greater than the value of the off-diagonal. Okay, so that's how you interpret. Okay, Forner-Larker, look for the diagonal values, then those off-diagonal, or the values of the diagonal should be greater than the values of the off-diagonal. That is Forner-Larker. Again, how did we identify discriminant validity using Forner-Larker and using software? Okay, then we also use Htmp ratio. Okay, so what's the requirement for Htmp? One of the requirements, 0.9. Okay, it should be at a maximum of 0.9. So you will see all the values in this table are less than 0.9, which means we have discriminant validity using Htmp. Okay, so that's how we measure. So that's how we should be measuring reflective and formative. Okay, again, reflective construct is different from formative construct. The way we measure reflective construct is different from the way we measure formative construct. So it should be clear from the onset. Okay? So if you will be noticing this one, saan nagsisimula to? Where do we start? It is from designing our research instrument. Okay? Look at this one. This is a study conducted by these authors. Okay, these two authors. Okay, So I got this one from the presentation of a good colleague in Malaysia, Professor Chua. So he did a presentation, I think, few months ago, and I attended his presentation. And one of the items that he presented was this one. Okay, this one. Look at this one. This slide in particular is all about incorrect measurements of the construct. Okay, they found out, so they reviewed articles from Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing, Journal of Marketing Research, and Marketing Science. Okay, and they found that 32% of the constructs have been measured incorrectly. Okay, so you will see if there are, for example, 100 articles, 32 of them were poorly measured. Okay, simply because they were not able to identify properly the type of construct that they will be using. Is it a reflective or is it a formative? Okay, it was identified. For example, they modeled reflective, okay, but it should be formative. Or they modeled as formative, but it should be reflective. Okay, ibig sabihin, they measured, for example, a reflective construct where in fact it should be a formative construct. On the other hand, they modeled it as formative where in fact it should be a reflective construct. Okay, so you will see here, if you will be identifying incorrectly your constructs, what would you expect with your results and with your conclusions? Okay, so that's the importance of identifying your constructs. Okay, so to recap, these are the 3 requirements for a reflective construct: internal consistency, convergent validity, and discriminant validity. And as I mentioned, this is the most commonly used, okay, in most research studies. Then we have formative, we have convergent validity, collinearity, outer weights, and significance. Okay, so these are the 3 requirements also if your construct is a formative construct. Okay, so that is basically all about formative and reflective. Okay, I'm just going, these are just definition. Okay, some of you may possibly think, if I will be doing a research instrument, do I need to come up with my own measurement of the construct? For example, you want to measure satisfaction, but this time you want to create your own, okay, measure satisfaction. So what do you need to do? Okay, if, for example, you want to create your own instrument, it means you have a concept, let's say satisfaction, and you want to create, okay, new items to measure satisfaction. Then the first thing that you need to do is you need to conduct factor analysis using exploratory factor analysis. Okay, what is factor analysis in general? There are 2 types of factor analysis: exploratory factor analysis and confirmatory factor analysis. What is factor analysis? It is a technique that is used to reduce a large number of variables into fewer numbers of factors or indicators or items. Okay, so factor analysis is used, for example, if you want to come up with items or indicators to measure a construct. If, for example, you're going to do it from the scratch, it means you will be doing a new way of measuring, let's say, satisfaction. The first requirement is for you to conduct an exploratory factor analysis. Okay? Once you performed exploratory factor analysis, let's say you were able to come up now with new items or new indicators to measure satisfaction. Okay, the next step is basically you need to confirm, okay, that those items that measure satisfaction. So you will need to perform confirmatory factor analysis. Okay, so let's try to differentiate the 2. So what is exploratory factor analysis? It is called EFA. Okay, so exploratory factor analysis, this process explores data and provides the researcher with information about how many factors are needed to best represent the data. Okay, from the word itself, exploratory, so it explores your data. Okay? Of course, if you will be coming up with a new way of measuring a construct, what do you need to do? Read literature. What are the current literature? What are the current studies that measure satisfaction, for example? You can conduct interview in order for you to properly identify what are the exact items that measure satisfaction. Okay, so that is exploratory. In exploratory factor analysis, all items or indicators are related to every factor through a factor loading estimate. It means those items that you will be including in measuring a construct should be related. It is performed when little is known about factor structure, construct, or variable. It means exploratory factor analysis is basically used if there's no, for example, there's little knowledge or little literature that measure a specific construct. For example, this is just an example. Let's say you want to measure happiness at work and you cannot find any construct that measures happiness at work. Then you can explore now happiness at work as your construct and try to identify or come up with items that measure happiness at work. But you need to perform first exploratory factor analysis. Okay? Of course, this technique is based on the decision of a software. So what are the common software that are being used? Most researchers use AMOS or EMOS. For myself, I usually use Jamovi, which I feel more user-friendly, okay, in which the results are produced from correlation statistic result, but not from theory. Okay? On the other hand, if it is confirmatory, okay, this technique is based on well-developed measurement theory to confirm that the indicator is measuring the construct. Let's assume you want to measure job satisfaction, okay? You want to measure job satisfaction. And let's say there are different literature, okay, that measure job satisfaction. Let's say LACAP 2015. This is just an example. LACAP 2015 developed a measure which is job satisfaction. Okay. Then let's assume you want to use my construct in your paper as the construct of your study. Okay. Then you need to confirm now whether those items that I used to measure job satisfaction are still applicable. Okay. That's the reason it is called confirmatory. You are confirming whether job satisfaction measured by LACAP 2015 are still okay to be used in your study. Okay, so confirmatory factor analysis is used when a priority factor construct exists. When we say a priori, there's already existing, okay, measurement of those constructs. Okay, of course, when conducting confirmatory factor analysis, one cannot delete or omit more than 20% of the items in the model. Okay? Okay, what does it mean? If you will be performing CFA, okay, confirmatory factor analysis, okay, usually the requirement based on literature, you cannot delete 20%. So if there are 50 items, you cannot delete 20% of those items in measuring, for example, job satisfaction. Okay, it is not entirely appropriate to conduct CFA based on EFA results, and that CFA and AFA cannot be conducted using the same set of data. What do I mean? In exploratory factor analysis, you will have a data set. Okay, so you will be floating questionnaire to first set or group of respondents. If you will be performing confirmatory, you need to conduct again, okay, your data gathering. You cannot use your previous data set that were used in your exploratory factor analysis. Okay, so if you're going to perform exploratory factor analysis, you usually perform 2 data gathering. Okay, so that's the difference. That's the importance of factor analysis. Okay, number 3 rather, we are on the third item. These are just quick additional information. Of course, back translation. I think you are familiar with this one. This is commonly used in cultural research. So back translation is the process whereby the translated text is retranslated back into the source language by a translator who does not see the original text. Okay, so we usually conduct back. So for example, let's say you have respondents. Let's say you used let's say you measured job satisfaction from the study of, let's say, LACAP 2015. Okay, so you used job satisfaction construct from the study of LACAP 2015, and you will be utilizing that in your research paper. Okay, you need to consider now, okay, the language. So for example, if my paper, LACAP 2015, utilized English to measure job satisfaction, the language of the items are in English. Then if you will be utilizing it in your paper, let's say you are from the Philippines now, okay, you can use English also if you feel that your respondents can also understand the English language, or you can do back translation also, or translation itself. Okay, you can translate it in, for example, in Tagalog, if you feel the respondents will more understand those items in Tagalog. Okay, so that is the importance of translation or back translation. Number 4, reverse coding. Okay, you need to consider also if you want to do reverse coding, particularly if you are coming up with quote-unquote negative items. So let's have an example here. So let's assume we have, this is just an example, we have 4 items, okay, to measure food quality. Okay, so we have 4 items to measure food quality here. You will see the first 3 items are stated positively and the other one is negatively. So for example here, the answer for item 1, let's say the respondents picked 5. Then in item 2 also 5. Then item 3 is also 5. And let's say here the answer is 1. You need to reverse code it because it is stated negatively. So instead of coding it as 1, you need to code it now as 5. That is what we call reverse coding. Okay? Then I think this is the last one, the difference between pre-testing and pilot testing. Particularly, this is very important if you are a graduate school, if you are a graduate school student, and you are doing your PhD paper or maybe your MBA thesis. You need to consider doing pre-testing or and pilot testing. So what's the difference? When we say pre-testing, it is performed to address the following. So pre-testing is basically looking for the format, your layout, your length, the sequencing, the quality of your items. That is pre-testing. Pilot testing is basically a preliminary study method to assess the following: the feasibility in conducting your research, the time, the cost, the possible adverse event. Like this one, we have pandemic. So most probably some of our graduate school students are having hard time gathering their data. So you need to consider that. Then identifying the effect size or the appropriateness of sample size. Okay, and of course, pilot testing is done to improve the study design before, okay, the full survey is performed. Okay, so that's the difference between pre-testing and pilot testing. Okay, so I think that's all for today. I hope I was able to impart to you some important things that you need to remember every time we will be designing our instrument or our research questionnaire. So again, thank you very much, and thank you and enjoy doing research. So if you want to contact me, these are some of my details. You can email me. These are my email addresses. Or if you want to connect with me through my research professional platform, social media, so you can connect with me through all these links. Okay? So again, thank you very much.
Official, the staff of official recognition by the state. Good afternoon, everyone. Uh,
Good afternoon, Prof.
next,
Joel.
good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Lakap. We are now in the question and answer. If you have questions, kindly post your question in
Okay, I think, is it okay if I will be reading some of the concerns or questions of our participants in our chat box?
okay po.
Okay, I'm just going to scroll down some of the. Okay, may I know if participants will be getting the presentation slides? I will be giving my presentation slides to the organizers. So maybe, of course, I am allowing everyone to have a copy of my presentation. Okay, so most probably I will be sending this copy to Professor Nartea, and Professor Nartea most probably will be sending you a copy of my presentation. Okay, from Professor Ray, what is the acceptable sample size for pilot testing? So if you will be conducting pilot testing, of course, you can, Professor Ray, you can read literature. Usually, the requirement is around 30 to 50 if you will be conducting a pilot testing. Of course, again, if you will be asking me every time I conduct, for example, if I will be conducting pilot testing, I usually look for literature to support the number of my sample size. Okay, so that's how I do it, so that I have substantial proof that those numbers are already okay for pilot testing. Okay.
Sir, another
What
one.
else?
Hello, sir.
Okay.
Another one for
Yes,
Dr.
Prof.
Ray.
Nartea.
Yes, sir.
Sure,
Question
sure.
from Dr. Ray Premista. In which statistical software do you usually perform the factor analysis?
Okay, so for factor analysis, EMOS is a powerful tool to measure factor analysis. But personally, I use Jamovi. I find it more user-friendly, and it is also a freeware. That's the reason I am using it. So I use factor analysis using Jamovi. So you can go to Google, type Jamovi. Jamovi is a freeware. It is quite a powerful software, almost the same as IBM SPSS. The difference is Jamovi is a freeware. So I usually use Jamovi every time I conduct factor analysis.
Follow-up question, sir. Can we use Jamovi for CFA and SEM?
Yes, definitely. You can use Jamovi if you want to perform exploratory factor analysis and confirmatory factor analysis. What is good about Jamovi? One, as I mentioned, it is user friendly. At the same time, I feel, of course, this is only a personal opinion. I feel it is more user friendly because of the interface as compared with IBM SPSS EMOS. So personally, if you will be asking me which software I use for factor analysis, I use Jamovi. Of course, if you want to use IBM SPSS EMOS, that's okay. Okay, because that is the commonly used software for factor analysis.
Hi, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Prof. Ryan.
Sir, naghang ako kanina. It's nice to see you again. Sir, we have a question from Dean Ramos. So can we combine the two types of construct in our survey form?
You mean combine or use, for example, reflective and formative? Is that the question?
Yes po, can we combine that in our survey form?
So for example, this is just an example. Assuming, let's say, you want to measure, let's say, job satisfaction, let's say loyalty, and let's say organizational commitment. Let's say you have 3 constructs or 3 variables. For example, for job satisfaction, you utilize reflective. For loyalty, you use reflective. But for commitment, for example, you use formative. That's okay. Okay, as long as you followed the criteria on how you measure them. Okay, so that's the importance. You need to properly measure if it is reflective, yung tatlong steps, yung sinabi ko kanina, and if it is formative, those 3 requirements also. Okay, so you can use formative reflective in your instruments.
Thank you very much, sir. Upon checking, meron pa bang ibang questions from our participants? Please don't hesitate to put that in our chat box. Okay. Let's check if we still have questions. Okay, sir, we have one more question. How can we prove the reliability and validity if we are planning to use a standardized test?
How can you prove validity and reliability in a
Yes, if we are planning to use a
questionnaire,
standardized test.
Okay. Same process also. Remember, if you will be, let's say you will be borrowing or adopting, let's say job satisfaction. Job satisfaction, you're going to borrow it from Lockup 2015. This is just an example. Lockup 2015, you want to borrow his measure of job satisfaction. And according to Lockup, there are 15 items to measure job satisfaction. And based on his study, job satisfaction is valid and reliable. Okay? Mm-hmm. And let's say it was measured reflective. Okay? So you will be using that, let's say, in your paper now. Okay? How can you prove the validity and reliability? Again, you need to perform validity and reliability, particularly if you will be changing or tweaking those items. Okay? So it is very important that you will be performing validity and reliability tests again. Why? Because remember, those respondents utilized by Lockup 2015 is different compared with the respondents that will be used in your study now. So for example, my respondents were Indonesians, but now I will be using Filipinos as my respondents. So expect that there will be possible, okay, differences in terms of answers. So there's a need again to perform validity and reliability test. Remember, this is if it is a reflective construct. Okay, again, you need to clarify yourself from the onset whether that construct is utilized as reflective or formative, so that you will be able to properly measure them.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Another question from Professor Gisalva. Reflective and formative constructs can go together po pala, requiring 2 or more reliability and validity tests?
Again, sir, hindi ko nakuha yung question.
Parang kino-confirm ni Professor Gisalva if reflective and formative constructs can go together po pala, requiring 2 or more reliability and validity tests.
Just remember, the one that I mentioned a while ago, if your construct is reflective, the requirements are internal consistency using reliability tests like Cronbach's and Composite Reliability. Then you need to measure Discriminant Validity and Convergent Validity. But if it is a formative construct, you will be measuring your Convergent Validity, your collinearity, and at the same time, your outer weight and significance. So in a formative construct, you do not measure reliability anymore because you will not be expecting that there will be internal consistency given that the construct is a formative construct. Okay, instead, you will be measuring the level of collinearity. Okay? So that's the difference between the two. That's the reason I always emphasize that if you will be coming up with a construct and you will be measuring that, let's say reflective, you need to follow the guidelines on how to measure them. If it is formative, there are also guidelines on how to measure them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lakap. And another question. What is your recommended software for statistical measurement aside from SPSS? And what is your recommended software for, actually, that is the entire question. So what is your recommended
Okay.
software for statistical measurement aside from SPSS? From Professor
Okay.
Briones.
Okay. If you will be asking me, remember I do not endorse any statistical software. I'm not affiliated with any organizations. I'm endorsing a specific software. But personally, I use now the Warp PLS, and I also use the Smart PLS. These are new softwares that are available, but unfortunately, they are not free, but they have trial version. So I would suggest you download them, then you try to use them, then try to identify which is more comfortable to you. Personally, I am more comfortable with Warp PLS. I've been using Warp PLS for I think 4 or 3 years now. So I am more comfortable with Warp PLS, and most of my research publications, I utilize Warp PLS. So I seldom use IBM SPSS. I only use IBM SPSS if I will be doing, for example, descriptive statistics, using, for example, t-test, ANOVA. So I use SPSS. But if I will be measuring, for example, reliability, validity, other advanced statistical tests such as partially square structural equation modeling, I use Warp PLS because I find more user-friendly.
Thank you again, Sir Lakap. And another question. In making constructs, if one chooses to adopt an instrument and the researchers saw the necessity to make some changes on it, however, it's more than 20% of the required, is it more now on exploratory factor analysis?
Okay, if you will be, for example, adopting a previous instrument, let's see job satisfaction again, and you will be omitting, let's say, more than 20%, then you need to try to evaluate again whether that construct is the appropriate construct to measure your construct or the items that you utilize. Okay. Are you going to perform confirmatory factor analysis? Remember, confirmatory factor analysis is the traditional way of measuring or confirming an existing construct. Okay, and if you will be using confirmatory factor analysis, CFA, the main requirement in most literature tells us that you cannot omit 20% out of the total items measuring the construct. Okay, of course, if my suggestion will always be, for example, you find it difficult and you omitted more than 20%, maybe try to look for literature to substantiate your claim that you can delete more than 20%. Okay, because remember, the requirement of 20% is only based on the literature that I have read. So I do not know if there are already some progress or improvement that now tells us that you can omit more than 20%. So my suggestion would be, try to look for literature that will substantiate your claim, or maybe look for another source, okay, to measure your construct. Most probably there's that construct is problematic based on your source. So for example, you got it from Lockup 2015, then you try to adapt it and you will perform confirmatory factor analysis and you need to omit 20%, most probably there's something wrong with Lockup 2015 construct. Okay, so try to look for another one.
Noted, Sir Lakap, and thank you. So we are actually live now in our Facebook group crossover. And we also have one question from our viewers, Professor Rahul Baradwaj. I'm not so sure if I'm able to pronounce it correctly. The question is, how much sample is standard?
How much sample is?
Standard.
Okay, if I am getting it right, maybe he's asking what is the appropriate sample size.
I think so.
Okay. Okay. In measuring, if in identifying the sample size, of course, there are different techniques. If you will be asking me, I can have a presentation of that, maybe 2 hours just to present sample size estimation. But just to give you an idea, there are different ways on how to estimate your sample size. If you will be asking me, every time I conduct my research, I use the advanced techniques now in measuring the sufficiency of sample size. Gone are the days that most of us are following the traditional sample size calculations, such as, for example, you are using the traditional formula. I am currently using the gamma exponential method and the inverse square root method. These are the two methods that are highly highly not really required, but they are now mostly used. Okay, if you want to publish, for example, your paper in Scopus or ISI index journals, they are more sophisticated. But what is good with gamma exponential method and the inverse square root method to estimate your sample size, they are based on the level of the beta coefficient or the path coefficient, the level of statistical power. Okay, so based siya sa power, not the population. Okay, and these are advanced techniques on how to estimate the sample size. You can read the paper of, I think if I'm not mistaken, it is Koch and Hadaya 2012 or 2015. They have one article just discussing sample size, particularly gamma exponential method and inverse square root method.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Last few questions, sir. Okay. So can we use the same sets of instrument to two different types of respondents? For example, job performance of alumni as perceived by themselves and their employers.
Again, I did not get that, Prof. Ryan.
Okay, can we use the same set of instruments to two different types of respondents? For example, sir, we are conducting research on job performance of alumni as perceived by the alumni themselves and the employers.
Definitely, you can use the same instrument. Then maybe you can identify, for example, if you will be using the first generation statistical test, you can identify if there's significant differences in their answers or responses. Or if you will be, for example, using the second generation statistical test, you can conduct multi-group analysis, MGA, to identify if there are differences in the responses. Okay, so you can use, for example, one instrument to measure, let's say, performance, and your respondents are, for example, alumni and, let's say, administrators, for example, or employees. Okay, then you can you can use the same instrument. Then maybe I would suggest, since you are conducting in terms of two groups, if you will be using the first generation statistical test, you can come up with a study comparing the responses. Okay, but if you will be using the second generation statistical test, you can use multi-group analysis, for example, or the MGA, okay, to measure the differences in the responses.
Thank you, sir, so much. Last one question. Okay. Do we still need experts' validation of the instrument if reliability and validity tests via software will be done?
If you will be asking me, do you need an expert validation? Maybe my direct answer is, if you are a graduate school student, I usually require them to do expert validation, just to simply, because remember, there are different levels of validation. Okay, validation, the highest form is basically using statistical tests. That's the reason we are conducting discriminant and convergent validity. The lowest form of validation is basically face validity. Okay, asking for expert opinion. Okay, so if you are a graduate school student, I usually require them to do that, just to undergo this type of validity testing, from the simplest validity testing up to the most complex, or not really complex, but sophisticated way of validating the instrument.